For decades, Hollywood whispered about their feud, two queens locked in a silent war, but no one, not the studios, not the reporters, not even their closest friends, ever heard the truth from the woman who lived it, until now. This is the moment Bette Davis finally exposes Joan Crawford, a revelation sharpened by years of rivalry, ambition, betrayal, and brilliance, an untold confession from one of the fiercest talents Hollywood ever produced. Before she faced Crawford, before the rivalry turned into legend, Bette Davis was simply a girl named Ruth Elizabeth Davis, born April 5th, 1908, in Lowell, Massachusetts, already carrying a fire inside her that the world wasn't ready for, a fire that would make her a star and a target. Her childhood was a strict, disciplined, shaped by a family that demanded excellence, and that discipline hardened into the steel she carried into Hollywood, a steel that Joan Crawford would one day collide against. But long before the feud, before the daggers hidden behind red carpet smiles, Bette Davis was fighting another battle, the battle to earn her place in a world ruled by men and controlled by studios. She studied at the Boston School of Fine Arts, then the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York. Walking into those doors as an ordinary young woman, walking out as a force of nature. Her early stage years honed her presence, sharpened her emotional depth, and carved the fierce confidence that would one day shake Hollywood. When she moved into films in the 1930s, she refused to be boxed into the pretty woman stereotype. Instead, she tore down the rules, playing difficult, raw, sometimes unlikable women. It shocked audiences, it terrified studios, and it changed Hollywood forever. Her breakthrough in Of Human Bondage, 1934, didn't just impress critics. It redefined what a woman could be on screen. This fearlessness became her signature, and it was exactly the kind of a strength Joan Crawford envied. But envy wasn't the beginning of their feud. To understand what ignited that war, we must first understand the woman Bette Davis became, shaped by triumphs, tragedies, and the relentless battle for artistic freedom. And that story starts here. As Bette Davis stepped deeper into Hollywood's golden era, her reputation grew, not because she played glamorous women draped in jewels, but because she dared to reveal the rawest corners of the human soul. She mastered roles that demanded strength and vulnerability, cruelty and compassion. And audiences couldn't look away. Her performances in Jezebel, 1938, and Now Voyager, 1942, solidified what critics had already begun to whisper. Bette Davis wasn't just acting, she was transforming, living, bleeding into every role. But what made Bette stand apart wasn't only her talent, it was her unyielding independence. Hollywood in the 1930s was a kingdom controlled by studio bosses, and actors were expected to obey without question. Bette Davis refused. When she felt Warner Brothers was giving her roles unworthy of her abilities, she did the unthinkable. She fought them, publicly, legally, fiercely. In an era when actresses had no leverage, she challenged an entire system that dictated every aspect of an actor's life. It wasn't just rebellion, it was a declaration, a message to Hollywood that she would not be silenced, shaped, or controlled. Her battle didn't just change her career, it cracked the studio system's armor, paving the way for generations of actors to fight for creative control. By the time she received 2 Academy Awards for Dangerous, 1935, and Jezebel, 1938, the industry knew one thing: you could admire Bette Davis, you could fear her, but you could never ignore her. She earned 10 additional Oscar nominations and, eventually, the American Film Institute's Lifetime Achievement Award. Yet even with all her accolades, the storm in her personal life mirrored the intensity of her professional battles. Bette Davis worked relentlessly. Television, stage, film, anything that kept her connected to the craft she worshipped. And behind that relentless drive was a woman shaped by love, loss, ambition, and heartbreak. Experiences that would soon play a role in her most notorious rivalry. And eventually, the silence she kept for decades would shatter. Behind the piercing eyes and iron-willed determination that defined her screen presence, Bette Davis carried a personal life far more fragile and far more turbulent than the public ever knew. While Hollywood celebrated her brilliance, her heart endured a series of storms that left scars no award could heal. Her first marriage in 1932 to Harmon Nelson began with hope, but quickly unraveled under the weight of their unequal careers. Nelson was talented, yet overshadowed, ambitious, yet unrecognized. Meanwhile, Bette's star was rising faster than either of them could control. As her fame grew, so did the distance between them. He felt eclipsed, she felt constrained, and the pressure of her demanding Hollywood schedule only deepened the cracks. By 1938, the marriage collapsed, marking the first of many heartbreaks that would define Bette's private world. A reminder that even the strongest women can be undone by the quiet ache of an incompatible love. Then, in 1940, she married Arthur Farnsworth, a gentle New England innkeeper whose grounded, simple life offered Bette a rare taste of peace. For a moment, it seemed she had found the refuge she never had in the chaos of Hollywood. But fate dealt a devastating blow. In 1943, Farnsworth suffered a severe head injury. 2 days later, on August 25th, he died. Suddenly, without warning. The loss shattered Bette. It wasn't just grief, it was the kind of grief that hollowed out a person from the inside. Her life had always been dramatic on screen, but this tragedy blurred the line between performance and reality. She carried the pain for years, and it shaped her view of love in ways she would never fully escape. But life pushed forward, and in 1945, she married William Grant Sherry. With him, she welcomed her only biological child, Barbara Davis Hyman. Motherhood brought a new kind of joy, but also new complications. Bette's relentless dedication to her craft left little time for the tenderness her marriage needed. And once again, the strain became too much. They divorced in 1950, but the deepest wound was yet to come. Over the years, Bette's relationship with Barbara deteriorated into conflict and painful misunderstandings. The rift grew wider, colder, until eventually Bette made a heartbreaking decision. She disinherited her own daughter. It was a choice that revealed just how fractured their once hopeful family bond had become, an emotional scar that followed Bette until the end of her life. Later in 1950, she married again, this time to actor Gary Merrill, a man who understood the harsh demands and unpredictable chaos of Hollywood. Together, they adopted 2 children, Margot and Michael, attempting to build a stable home in a world where the stability was nearly impossible, but even shared fame couldn't shield them from the pressures of balancing ambition, marriage, and family. The strain mounted, the cracks widened, and after a decade, their union collapsed. In 1960, Bette faced yet another divorce, another chapter closed, another reminder that her personal life was as dramatic as anything Hollywood ever put on film. And through it all, Joan Crawford watched, competed, maneuvered, and waited. Their rivalry simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the moment it would ignite into one of Hollywood's most infamous feuds. For decades, Hollywood insiders whispered about it, and fans speculated endlessly. The legendary feud between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, a rivalry so intense, so electric, that it became almost mythical, fuel for biographies, gossip columns, and late-night conversations among film historians. Yet for all the rumors, one thing remained strikingly consistent. Bette Davis herself rarely spoke about it. She let the world talk while she stayed silent, her gaze fixed on the work, on the craft, on the roles that immortalized her. But eventually, after years of holding her tongue, Bette decided it was time to cut through the fiction, time to expose what truly happened behind the velvet curtains of old Hollywood. Her voice was sharp, unmistakably Bette, forthright, unfiltered, and fiercely honest. Joan always had a way of presenting herself as gracious and charming, she said, the kind of woman who could smile while she plotted. It was a single sentence that peeled back decades of speculation, because Bette wasn't speaking from jealousy or gossip, she was speaking from experience. She claimed she had seen through Joan's carefully curated elegance, the polished politeness that was more a strategy than sincerity. I never bought into the facade, Bette continued. I saw right through her smiles and her polite words, and I wasn't afraid to call out the games when I noticed them. The industry had long debated whether their feud was real or exaggerated, but Bette's words removed all doubt. The rivalry was personal, professional, and deeply rooted in who they were. Two powerful women fighting to be respected in a world that constantly underestimated them. Bette reflected on the pressure actresses faced in Hollywood's golden age. They weren't just competing for attention, they were competing for survival in a system designed to control them. Joan had the beauty and the publicity, Bette said, but I had the roles, the awards, the fire. It was an admission laced with vulnerability, because their rivalry wasn't born from pettiness, it was born from ambition, from the relentless, suffocating demand to be perfect in an industry that punished imperfection. She envied the attention I received for my performances, Bette explained, and I envied the way she could command a room without saying much at all. Two women, two strengths, two insecurities, and one battlefield called Hollywood. Their feud wasn't just about jealousy, it was about power. A power both women fought for in different ways under the harsh spotlight of an era that demanded everything and offered little in return. But for Bette, the rivalry went beyond awards and roles. It seeped into the personal spaces, into the dressing rooms, the corridors, the social gatherings, where Joan's charm often masked something far more calculated. And in the next part, Bette reveals exactly what she believed Joan Crawford did behind the scenes. As Bette Davis dug deeper into her memories, the rivalry with Joan Crawford shifted from a distant myth into something far more human and far more unsettling. Because behind the gowns, the red carpet smiles, and the carefully curated elegance, Bette insisted there was another Joan, a Joan who wielded charm like a weapon, a Joan whose every gesture was calculated, a Joan who knew exactly how to twist a situation to her advantage. Joan could charm everyone around her, Bette said, but often that charm was a tool, not a genuine expression of friendship or loyalty. It wasn't bitterness speaking, it was recognition, born from years of watching Crawford operate in the shadows of studio politics. Bette recounted moments on set where Joan would slowly and subtly undermine co-stars, turning simple collaborations into games of silent manipulation. There were times Joan took credit for sparks of inspiration that weren't hers. Times she redirected attention to herself with perfectly timed remarks or gestures. Times she gently shifted public perception, always in her favor and never without purpose. All the while, she maintained the image of a refined, gracious lady, the star who never raised her voice, the beauty who floated through a room like royalty. But Bette saw more. She saw the strategy, the way Joan's charm flowed one minute, then tightened like a snare the next. This wasn't merely rivalry, it was a psychological chess match. Hollywood was full of smiling faces, but none smiled quite like Joan Crawford, Bette insisted, because Joan's smile was armor, disguise, and battlefield all at once. Yet what made Bette's revelation so striking wasn't the accusation, it was the calmness in her voice when she said it. I knew Joan, I knew her ways, Bette reflected softly, and I chose not to be broken by them. There was no venom, no rage, only a seasoned woman finally telling her truth after years of silence. She wasn't trying to destroy Joan's legacy. She was reclaiming her own story from the rumors, the gossip, the half-truths that had accumulated around their names like fog. Her tone carried wisdom, not hatred, experience, not vengeance, context, not cruelty. In exposing Joan, she was also exposing Hollywood itself, a world where alliances were fragile, smiles were unscripted, and power was always shifting just below the surface. And in the next part, Bette goes even deeper, revealing the emotional heart of their rivalry and the pressures that pushed both women to their limits. Even as Bette Davis exposed Joan Crawford's tactics, there was a surprising tenderness beneath her words, a reluctant understanding that their feud was shaped by forces far bigger than just two women who refused to back down. Because Hollywood in their era was not a nurturing place, it was a battlefield disguised as a dream, a world that demanded women be flawless, obedient, glamorous, and quiet, while punishing them the moment they showed ambition or strength. We were two women trying to survive and thrive in a world that demanded perfection. Bette reflected, her voice tinged with a mixture of regret and pride, and it punished any hint of weakness. That single sentence reframed the entire feud. Bette acknowledged that beneath the rivalry was something far more complex, a struggle against a system that forced women to compete for a handful of meaningful roles. Not because they wanted to fight each other, but because they had been taught that only one woman could win. The studios loved that tension. It sold tickets. It kept the gossip columns alive, and it kept the actresses in line. So when Bette and Joan clashed, their battle wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. Two titans fighting not only for recognition, but for survival in an industry where aging was a curse, beauty was currency, and power was always slipping through their fingers. Bette understood this deeply. That's why, even as she detailed Joan's manipulations, she refused to reduce her to a villain. She envied me, Bette admitted softly, and I envied her. It was the most honest admission of all. Joan envied Bette's acting talent, her fire, her awards, her fearlessness on screen. And Bette envied Joan's ability to command attention without effort, her beauty, her poise, the way she could walk into a room and own it with a single glance. Two strengths, two insecurities, two lives intertwined by fame and expectation. What the world saw as hatred was, In reality, a complicated mixture of admiration, resentment, and a survival instinct. A rivalry born not from cruelty, but from the pressures of being extraordinary women in a world that preferred them silent. Through her honesty, Bette didn't just expose Joan Crawford, she exposed the truth about Hollywood's golden age, a place where glamour hid wounds, where ambition came at a cost, and where even the brightest stars cast long, lonely shadows. But the story doesn't end with rivalry. In the next part, Bette reveals the emotional clarity she found in her final years, along with the truth behind her shocking decision to break decades of silence. As Bette Davis reached the later years of her extraordinary life, something within her began to shift. The silence she had maintained for decades, the silence that allowed rumors to swirl and Hollywood folklore to grow, no longer felt necessary. She had survived the battles. She had endured the losses. She had outlived the era that forged her. And now, with the clarity that only age and experience could bring, she finally chose to speak. Her voice was steady, carrying neither anger nor bitterness, only truth sharpened by time. Through her reflections, she painted a picture of Joan Crawford, not as a monster, but as a woman shaped by the same unforgiving world that shaped her. A world where charm was currency, where alliances were fleeting, where every smile held a secret, and where survival required a strategy. Yet Bette never downplayed the reality of Joan's behavior. Joan could charm everyone around her, she said, but that charm was often a tool, a blade dressed in velvet. Bette recalled how Joan would sometimes shift situations to her advantage, taking credit, redirecting attention, subtly undermining others, always maintaining the illusion of grace. But Bette's tone wasn't accusatory. It was almost weary, almost understanding, because she knew what the world demanded of women like them. She knew the masks they had been forced to wear. I wasn't broken by her, Bette reflected. I knew her ways. There was no triumph in her voice, only a quiet acceptance, an acknowledgement of the decades they spent navigating fame, pressure, insecurity, and ambition under a spotlight bright enough to scorch anyone. Her expose wasn't gossip, it was history, a reclaiming of her narrative after years of letting others control the story. And in revealing her truth, Bette accomplished something rare. She humanized the feud. She stripped away the sensationalism, the exaggerations, the caricatures, and exposed two women fighting for dignity and power in a system built to deny them both. Her honesty transformed the feud from scandal into legacy, from rumor into record. But as illuminating as her revelations were, the story of Bette Davis still had one final chapter, one that unfolded far from Hollywood, in a moment of vulnerability, honor, and poetic closure. In the next part, we follow Bette into her final days, her last appearance, her final journey, and the emotional weight of her passing. As the years continued to pass, the fierce, unbreakable image of Bette Davis remained etched in the public imagination. But behind that powerful persona was a woman growing older, fighting new battles, this time not against studios, rivals, or critics, but against the quiet, inevitable fragility of the human body. On October 6, 1989, the world lost one of its greatest actresses. Bette Davis, at 81 years old, passed away from complications related to breast cancer. Her death occurred at the renowned American hospital in Neuilly-sur-Seine, just outside Paris, a city synonymous with art, elegance, and creative legacy. And in a way, it was fitting, because if Hollywood was her battleground, Paris was her curtain call. At the time of her passing, Bette had just come from Spain, where she had been honored at the prestigious San Sebastian International Film Festival, a celebration of global cinema that recognized her unparalleled contributions to the craft she had devoted her entire life to. Even in her final days, she refused to step away from the spotlight. Even weakened, she stood before audiences one last time, defiant, radiant, unstoppable. It was the perfect symbol of who she had always been, a woman who lived for the work, for the performance, for the art of storytelling. After her death, her body was flown back to the United States, back to Hollywood, back to the place where she had risen, fought, triumphed, and endured for more than half a century. She was laid to rest alongside her mother, Ruth Davis, and her sister, Barbara "Bobby" Davis, in a private family plot. It was a quiet ending, profoundly simple, deeply intimate, a stark contrast to the towering legacy she left behind. This final resting place wasn't chosen for extravagance or spectacle. It reflected a different side of Bette Davis, a side that few people ever saw, a woman who loved fiercely, who valued family even through conflict, who carried loyalty like armor, and who faced the world not just with ambition, but with heart. And though the cameras were gone, the applause faded, and the rivalry with Joan Crawford had long turned to myth, one truth remained: Bette Davis was larger than life, and yet in death she returned to something beautifully human. But her story is not over. There is one final part, one final emotional closure to tie together her legacy, her triumphs, her heartbreaks, and the unforgettable truth she revealed to the world. Bette Davis's life ended quietly, but her legacy did not. Her final chapter was not defined by illness, rivalry, or fading fame. It was defined by impact. Impact on cinema, impact on women in Hollywood, impact on the very idea of what it meant to be an actress. To the world, she will always be the woman who stared down the camera with unmatched ferocity, the woman whose eyes could cut deeper than any script, the woman who refused to conform, refused to soften, refused to become anything less than the truth. And that truth, unfiltered, unpolished, unbreakable, became her greatest gift to film history. Her rivalry with Joan Crawford, it will forever be part of her legend. But Bette's final words on the matter transformed it from tabloid drama into something far richer and more human. She reclaimed the narrative not to destroy Joan, but to illuminate the world they lived in, a world of pressure, beauty, ambition, fear, and survival. A world where two extraordinary women were forced into competition, not by choice, but by an industry that demanded they fight for the same narrow spotlight. In exposing Joan's calculated charm, in admitting her own envy and vulnerabilities, in revealing the painful truths behind their public smiles, Bette Davis didn't just settle a feud, she immortalized it. And she gave future generations a rare gift: context, honesty, a glimpse behind the velvet curtain of Hollywood's golden age, where glamour was a mask and rivalry was often a cry for recognition. Her passing in 1989 marked the end of an era, but it also cemented her as an icon whose influence stretches across time. From the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award to her 2 Academy Awards, from Jezebel to All About Eve, from her early rebellion against studio control to her final fearless confession about Joan Crawford, Bette Davis left behind a legacy carved not from perfection, but from truth. She rests today beside her mother and sister, a quiet resting place for a woman whose life was anything but quiet. A woman whose fire, talent, and determination shaped Hollywood itself. And as the world continues to revisit her films, her interviews, and her legendary rivalry, one thing becomes clear. Bette Davis was not just a star. She was a force, a revolution wrapped in silk and steel, a woman unafraid to expose the world and herself no matter the cost. And that is why her story will never fade. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever.